Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I am in Paso Robles, California, with Drew Nenow of Nenow Family Wines. Drew, welcome to Wine Soundtrack, and tell us about Nenow Family Wines.
Well, we're a ultra boutique winery. You got to add the ultra on there. We produce about 600 to 700 cases a year. Our program is built around sourcing the best Rhone varieties from the best Rhone vineyards in the Paso Robles west side. We have dabbled down in Santa Barbara because there's a few awesome vineyards down there too.
Yes, there are.
Yep. And it's a partnership between myself, my wife, my sister Tracie, and my brother-in-law Mike. And it was something that when they brought up the idea of starting our own wine label way back in 2014, I thought they were kidding. I was 24 at the time. I thought that they would never trust me with something like that. But come to find out that they were extremely serious about it. And fast forward to 2016, they told me to get some barrels and start finding some grapes. And Nenow Family Wines was born from there.
I love it. So Nenow Family Wines really is a family business, going you and your sister. And you said that you're sourcing fruit. You don't own any acres?
Correct. Yeah. It's a very similar program to what my aunt and uncle have been doing since the early 90s up in Napa Valley. We grew up in a winemaking family. I'm technically a second generation winemaker. And my aunt and uncle, Lisa Drinkward and Les Barron, started a wine label called Barron's and Hitchcock in the early 90s. From there, my aunt started another label called Drinkward Pachon with a fabulous winemaker named Francoise Pachon, who a lot of people listening to this who will be very familiar with. And their whole program was built around sourcing from the best vineyards in the Napa Valley and creating really eclectic wines and wines of distinction, and received a lot of high praise from Robert Parker in the 90s. And that was the environment that I was introduced to wine in via my father, who also got introduced to wine and started working harvest with them and eventually started his own brand making Napa Valley Cabernet and Syrah.
Wow.
So,
and then you came down here to focus on the west side of Paso Robles. And now you said you only make 600 cases. Are you 100% direct to consumer in tasting rooms? And what markets are your wines available in?
Yeah, I'd say about 98 to 99% direct to consumer. We're seated in our quaint little tasting room on Peachy Canyon Road here in the west side of Paso. And we work with two local wine shops here in town. The Paso Robles Wine Merchant down on Spring Street in Paso, and Fossil Wine Bar in Atascadero. Those are the only two accounts that we have ever sold wine to on a wholesale standpoint.
So you can ship across the country, and that's the best way to get the wines.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned that you grew up in a wine family. So what's your first memory relevant to wine?
Well, my aunt and uncle used to throw this party every year that they called their open house. It was always kind of late summer as they're getting into the fall. And one of my first memories was they have these picking bins at the winery that are for picking grapes. But after that party, these picking bins were full of wine bottles. And everybody that was coming to these parties just loved the stories behind the wine, the environment that my aunt and uncle had built up there, and the family of consumers that they had built around them was such a really positive energy. And I also was going up there with my dad when he was working harvest with them, and the toil, the work that they were putting in, the hours that they were putting in, and they always had a smile on their face. So I think it was those two things, the community of it, the culture of it, and then the passion for it. All those things coming together as an impressionable teenager, telling myself, this is what I want to do.
That's a good first impression.
Yeah.
So as you started drinking wine, what would you say is one of your aha moment wines? One of those wines that either was it the wine that set you on the path to focus on Rhone varieties or to make wine, or just, kind of was like, aha, I get it.
Yeah. That's an easy one, actually. That was one of John Albin's Grenaches out of Edna Valley. There's something about John's wines that from a Rhone standpoint is so true to where they came from and from the Rhone Valley. And it was just such a way with not a lot of oak. It was just pure essence of fruit and of the grape. And I really appreciated something that undressed and boiled down and a grape that could express itself so well. So to this day, Grenache is my favorite grape to make, and I definitely have John to thank for that.
But I love it too, because we're drinking a beautiful rosé of Grenache right now. So if we were to come into your home and go into your wine cellar or your wine closet or in the kitchen, the little fridge, I don't know how much wine you have, but what would we find in there? Is it a ton of Grenache? Is it specifically local or international?
It's a good mix of things. Especially my wife didn't grow up in a wine family. She's very new to those kinds of things, but she's very passionate about it. And she has really appreciated trying new things. So at this stage of where we're at right now, it's definitely heavy on the Paso because of the accessibility.
And you live here.
Yeah. And one of the greatest things for us to do on a weekend is to escape to some tasting room or just check out something new, which there's always something new in Paso. So, and most everything is really good too. So you can't really go wrong. So a lot of Paso, but internationally, a lot of Chateauneuf.
Of course.
Yeah. Especially if you're going to aspire to be something, if we're going to be a Rhone house, then we might as well feed from the best. So, Northern Rhone too, a lot of Côte Rôtie. There's something about the Syrah Viognier co-ferments from Côte Rôtie that I love. From a white wine standpoint, a lot of Alsatian whites. My wife loves Riesling, and I think that's where one of our wine preferences really intersect is with dry Riesling. Or Viognier from Condrieu in the Northern Rhone as well. Our tightrope wine is really a blend of those two different styles of Alsatian and Rhone whites.
Yeah. Nice selections. I want to come drink at your house. So I'm wondering if there is something that you drank recently, not your rosé of Grenache that you're drinking right now, because I'm going to say that's one of the best wines that I've had recently or today. I'm wondering, is there something from your cellar or that you were out recently that drank really well?
Well, there's a new winery up the hill from us called 6 Mile Bridge. The winemaker Anthony Yount is a friend, and his wines, he mostly does a lot of Rhone stuff over at Denner, but him and his wife really jumped onto the 6 Mile Bridge property and started growing Bordeaux varieties, which typically Bordeaux varieties in Paso are not my favorite, but this Peachy Canyon microclimate, the elevation of this place, the soil of this place is so unique to the west side of Paso, and there's something about those wines over there that it really changed my perspective of Bordeaux varieties in Paso, and I did really enjoy them, so that sticks out in my mind.
So you mentioned that you're a huge fan of Grenache, but do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety? Is Grenache a perfect variety, or is there a such thing?
No. It's, I think it's a reflection of the world around us. There's no such thing as a perfect place to grow grapes. There's no such thing as a perfect person. There's no such thing as a perfect building, whatever. Take your example. And the best example of things are when they support each other and when things are used in congruity with each other. And Grenache is beautiful. I use it in the one blend that we do called 11s. It's the basis of that wine. We build around it. But Grenache has beautiful aromatics, such delicate features on the nose and on the palate, but it doesn't have strength. It doesn't have tannin structure. You can introduce those things to Grenache, but then you start to take away from some of those more beautiful aspects of Grenache. So it's a give and take type thing. And at the pure essence of Grenache being delicate and floral, and it needs other varieties to truly structure it or fill it out or flesh it out.
So for you as a wine drinker, red, white, or rosé?
Red.
Still or sparkling?
Still.
Really easy. So those were your easy opinions, but I'm curious about your opinion on wine critics and scores.
Oh man, we're going to go there?
We have to go there.
What else? I'll say it from the consumer standpoint, because I think most of the people listening to this would be consumers. Is it's a difficult thing from the winemaking standpoint to base all of your decisions off of what a critic may think is right in a wine standpoint. But I would really recommend to people to find a wine reviewer, read their reviews on their tasting notes on something, and try that same wine and see who your palate is matching up with. Because at the end of the day, I think where I struggle with wine critics is that what we're doing here is subjective.
Yeah. And
by nature, what wine critics are trying to do sometimes, not all of them, some of them are extremely understanding and give to the notion that it is subjective. But at the end of the day, they're trying to make something that is subjective not. So I would find somebody that you really share a palate with, because everybody's palate's different. You're going to experience a wine totally different. Just like if you look at the color blue, is that the same color as me? Am I saying the same color as you? We have no idea, because we're independent. So, absolutely. And that's the fun of it, you know?
Yeah. No, and in a small brand like yours, I'm sure you're not, people have to seek out wines like yours, not through scores and awards, because you're a small producer. So hopefully they'll find you through this.
And I do want to say that I think reviewers do a great job in identifying what regions do really well. And it's a really positive thing that they do. And I think Robert Parker really helped solidify Cabernet in Napa Valley. It was there, but really solidified it as something that it does really, really well. And people like Jeb Dunnick are recognizing Rhone varieties. And I think Rhone varieties do best here. And he's really pushing that and has allowed Paso to become more on the world stage because of that. So I'm deeply appreciative of their ability to help communicate to the greater public that Cabernet doesn't work everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you really want to experience the complexity of wine and the terroir aspect of it, then you need to look at these different varieties and where they're being grown.
Well, and speaking of diversity of wine, when it comes to pairing with food, how do you approach that? Do you find there are rules to follow? Do you always say, oh, it's, steak, I must have Cabernet? Or do you have your own rules that you live by? Or do you just kind of come what may, it's hot out, this is what I'm in the mood for?
I tend to get stuck on textures. I think that is where wine and food pairings really collide in an interesting way. So if you have something that is extremely savory and you introduce something with a little bit of acid to it, and it cuts the savoriness, it allows other flavors to come out. So same thing with something that's highly tannic. You don't want texture on texture. So if you want to introduce something with a lot of tannin to something that is like a really soft cut of meat, and something that will just explode with flavor once you introduce that new texture, that's how I tend to go about it. But there are people, somms and people who have worked in restaurants and wine apart. I try not to dip my toe in places where I don't belong. And I need to stay in the vineyard and the winery, and I'll let other people tell me what goes well with the wine.
Well, you can play at home and figure that out. So for somebody who hasn't had the pleasure of tasting Nenow Family Wines yet, what do you think they're missing out on?
Well, when you come to Paso, when you come to a lot of wine regions, there's a lot of estate wineries that you may visit. And if you want to try wines from that particular vineyard, you have to go to that place and you're only tasting wines from that one vineyard. And what our program allows is a place to come and taste a diversity of vineyards in one place. And not just that, that you're tasting some of the best vineyards in Paso. The price of grapes in Paso has taken on a bit of an exponential leap since I first got here. We have
those wine critics that have given name to this region.
For better or worse, right?
Absolutely.
So we'll take it. I mean, that sounds like progress to me, if anything. But we have no control over that. It's what the market dictates. And what we know is we're going to pay the top dollar for the best fruit in the area. So I think that's what you really are missing out on, is the ability to taste a wide diversity of the best grapes in the region, made on an ultra boutique level, handcrafted. I am the only production employee of Nenow Family Wines, so my hands have gone into every single one of these. Not to say that it doesn't take a village. My wife supports. Tracie and Mike have supported in a lot of different ways. Ricky, our director of DTC sales, even gets in there too with his partner, and are super helpful during the harvest season. But day in and day out, they have been handcrafted by yours truly.
So if space aliens were to land on your property right now, which of your wines would you want to welcome them with to introduce Nenow wines?
Oh man, that's a really good one. I would say the 11s because by nature it is a representation of our program as a whole. The 11s is the only blend that we do, and it's always a GSM. In 2019, there's a little bit of Petite Syrah in there too. But it's an opportunity for us to take our favorite aspects of the different vineyards that we work with. Alta Colina Vineyard has incredible aromatics. So that lays at the basis. Syrah from La Vista Vineyard has power and strength. Morved from Alta Colina has mid-palate. So I would introduce that because it's the best representation of our portfolio as a whole. And then from there, you can taste the different components by themselves too.
I love that. So you're going into the vineyards, you're spending time visiting different vineyards. We know that vintage variation exists, but how much similarity do you see year to year? How much variation do you witness in a region like this?
There's some, and I think in the last, I can speak, I've been working in the area for about 10 years now, and we've seen a pretty dramatic shift in the climate around us. And my first year, I was working at Turley Wine Cellars, and that was 2011, which is widely known as a very difficult year, that there was an early frost. It was generally pretty mild. There was really early rains. Crop was really low. It was just, from a winemaking standpoint, it was a nightmare. And I was lucky that I was in such an established place with such experienced people at that moment. And then after 2011, 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, all drought years in a row, in which the intensity of the grapes only increased like a snowball. Every year as the drought continued on, the grapes were suffering and stressed out more and more, which were making incredibly concentrated and expressive wines wasn't necessarily very healthy for the vineyards, and we're paying for that now. But by 2017, we had a lot of rain that year, and we're immediately snapped right out of the drought. And we've seen a couple very bumper crops, 17, 18, 19 was hot, 20 was hot, and
21 is shaping up to be hot.
It's going to be 109 tomorrow, and we didn't get a lot of rainfall this last year. So it's vintage variation is a thing. I think you said it at the get-go. It's a thing. So
have you established any good luck rituals for when you're about to start harvest or in the middle of harvest, you and your family, or you, yourself, and you as the one person here?
I don't think Nenow Family has really come with any traditions just yet. At my other job, we always pop a bottle of sparkling and christen the first batch of grapes. Again, this is a second job for me. This is a side hustle, and it's just kind of go time. It's like whenever that first pick is ready, it's go. We pick up the grapes. We get after it. So there's no time for that, I think.
So, you're walking through many different vineyards, and you spend a lot of time, I'm sure, in particular rows where you're going to be sourcing your fruit from. Have you found yourself talking to your grapes at any point? And if so, what kind of communication do you have with them?
Oh, nothing but compliments. You got to talk them up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then here we're in your winery, in your tasting room, but I know your winery is just on the other side of the wall here, right? Where you make the wines?
We don't make the wines.
Oh, you're not making them here. I thought there was a barrel room next door.
This is the original Nenow Family Winery. So this is a bonded winery and has produced wine here in the past. But again, going back to this is a side hustle. Patty and Robert Nenow knew going into it that my hours of operation for winemaking are about 4 a.m. to 6:30 in the morning, and then again from 6 p.m. to whenever. And the fact that their home is about 25 yards away, I don't think they wanted any part of that.
Well, when you're over in the winery making your day job wine as well as your own wines, have you been known to talk to the wine in barrel or in tank? Do you sing to it or play music? I mean, do you feel that it affects the wine to have communication with it, or is that all just kind of silliness?
I can't say that I do.
It's all silliness.
It's all silliness, although it might break up if there was monotony of it. I don't know that there is monotony to this work, but it might.
So when you were a little boy, obviously you grew up, seeing harvest and the vineyards. Wine was in the family. But what did you want to be when you grew up? Did you always know this is what you wanted to do?
Yes.
Really?
This is what I wanted to do. I have it in a lockbox at home. A letter, the first documented case of it is when I was in 8th grade. My 8th grade teacher had me write a time capsule letter to myself, and it said, I hope you went to UC Davis, and I hope you studied wine, and I hope you're a winemaker. And that arrived in the mail to me 2 years ago.
Oh my God.
Serendipitously, right around the time that we had really started this brand, and I had been offered my first full-time winemaker job at my other job too. So
you actually lived up to the dream of your 8th grade self?
So far, I could totally screw it up, but
you went to UC Davis?
I did not go to UC Davis.
Okay.
My mind went to UC Davis because I initially wanted to be a veterinarian. I love animals, and the first time I visited UC Davis, no offense to any UC Davis people out there, people living in Davis, it wasn't my vibe. I grew up in San Diego. I was a beach and longboarding, long-haired Southern California, and something about the Davis area was a little too agrarian and then a little landlocked. So the first time I visited Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, saw there's vineyards here, there's a beach here. The vibe was very, as much as they say it's Central Coast, I think the vibe in San Luis Obispo is a bit more Southern Californian. So it just felt more like home.
And it has a great wine program, so,
Yes.
it was a win-win. So when you're not working your full-time job or your family job, what do you do in your free time?
Well, I have 2 small children, a 3-year-old and a about to be 2-year-old. They're 15 months apart.
So no free time.
So that pretty much takes all the free time that I might have. Nora was born in March of 2018, and then we quickly found out that we were pregnant again when Nora was only 6 months old.
Wow.
With our beautiful surprise Eden. And they're getting to a really fun age now, Eden's too, and they're super active. And I have to say that, yes, I have no free time, but my free time is time well spent.
Oh, I love it. And do you still surf or longboard?
Water's too cold here. I cannot surf. I tried as valiantly as I could, but I'm too much of a wuss for the cold water. I can only spend about 40 minutes out there, and I can't feel my toes, and it's not there. But yes, lots of longboarding. There's lots of great hills in the area, so I do that. Beach volleyball. I coached volleyball at the high school here for 5 years before we started Nenow Family Wines. Continue to play a lot of beach volleyball with friends.
So you get close to the water, just not in the water.
Exactly. Water adjacent.
So, on a rare occasion that you get a quiet, romantic evening with your wife, what sort of wines make for a romantic evening? I mean, you spoke about what you have at home, so I'm going to guess an Alsatian Riesling probably is somewhere on the menu. But is there anything in particular that sets the mood wine-wise?
Sets the mood. Yeah, Alsatian.
Creates the mood.
Yeah, Riesling. We have the best fish market right around the corner from our house called Pier 46. Anybody who visits the area, you gotta go.
I've been there.
It's so good, and that always pairs really well with our Alsatian whites. So we start there, but this is a great area to be outdoors. So we're always outside, and the temperatures cool off in the afternoon so well here. So it quickly turns into typically one of our favorite reds from Paso. Scott Hawley's Torrin label is always something I really enjoy. Connor McMahon over at Full Draw vineyards is always really good for a thick cut of steak, and the wines are awesome. We source grapes from them too. So it varies. We mix it up a lot. As I said, my wife is learning a lot, and she's very into it. So we're constantly mixing it up.
Fun. So when you look back at your life, career, or just life in general, we're given advice all the time from our teachers and our mentors and our family and our friends. Is there a piece of advice that someone gave you along the way that you try to live your life by or apply to your work?
There's two things. We very directly asked my aunt and uncle when we started this, Tracie, Mike, Andy, and I, what's your number one advice about owning a winery and what you do? And they said, pay your growers. It's like, well, that's pretty simple. But it's true. The hard work, the toil that goes into growing the grapes, and how singularly important that one aspect is to the end product makes it the most valuable resource that we have, and those growers the most valuable relationship we have. So the minimum of paying them for the work that they did stands pretty high. So that was one. And then what is cursing? Is cursing okay on this?
Sure.
Okay. I'll abbreviate it, but Mark Goldberg, he probably won't remember this, but at a wine fest a few years ago when we were getting started, Mark is someone who's been doing it for a long time. And I happened to be pouring next to him at an event in the downtown park in Paso. And I asked him the same, what would your one piece of advice be? And he said, get good grapes and don't F it up. Again, simple. But with those two things, we're going to pay our growers, we're going to get good fruit, and I'm going to do everything I can to, I keep things meticulously clean. Andy gets on me all the time about like, why didn't you get home until 11 o'clock? Why did that take so long? It's like, well, because it was dirty. I had to scrub something. I had to get something clean. And, yeah.
Do you keep your home as clean as your winery?
Our kitchen. I am avidly cleaning the kitchen all the time. I love a good clean kitchen. And then the rest of the house, my wife, and now siphoned off from Andy, they have a habit of leaving their shoes everywhere, which is a huge pet peeve of mine that I got from my father. So as long as there's no shoes in the house and the kitchen is clean, I'm good.
So when you look back at your career so far, and you've got a long career ahead of you, but when you look back at your career, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements so far?
I think this. I mean, as I said, our first vintage was 2017. We put 3 years of painstaking labor into it before we could even start selling wine. That's 3 years to worry about how it's going to sell, to worry about how the wines are going to be received, because cellar palate is the thing. I was loving the wines, but I had this deep personal connection that I had my hands on it the whole time and babied it through. And to think, it's like when you have a kid and you're about to like send it out into its first, like their first.
Well, they like my kid.
Yeah, it's like, and if they don't, it's devastating. And I'm so proud of the year that we've had, a little over a year. Our wine club filled up. Our initial slots of wine club and the founders club filled up within 10 months. We hired one of the most remarkable human beings, Ricky Lugo, who has just taken the ceiling of this place so much higher, and is just an all-around solid human being. The wine, we've sold out of our first vintage of wines within 12, 13 months. Wow. So we're on to our second vintage, and this year we're upping our tonnage to 14 tons instead of our usual 10. So
you'll be making more than 600.
We'll be closer to 750, maybe 800.
Wow.
Depending on how the season goes. But that's what I'm so proud of, is that the last few years, what has gone into it, and the amount of mental stress and it's such a roller coaster owning a business. I don't care what business you own, it's a roller
especially
coaster.
With your family.
Yes. Luckily, my sister and I are the same person, and what I'm thinking, I know she's thinking. So that's helpful.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love that. So complete this sentence for me. A table without wine is like?
No table at all.
And now I want you to imagine another scenario. Imagine, I mean, we're sitting at a counter here, but imagine we're at a table, there are chairs around, and there's an empty seat next to you. We've got the Nenow Family Wines on the table. Who from any walk of life, living or deceased, do you wish you could share a bottle of your wine with?
Vincent van Gogh? I mean, it probably wouldn't have helped his mental situation to be drinking wine. But the more I read about Van Gogh and his eccentricities, but not just that, his passion for what he did, and his struggle in life, there was some really interesting background to what made Van Gogh Van Gogh. So.
Ooh, I like that.
Thank you.
So we spoke earlier about vintage variation. And, you were talking about 2011 and then the drought and now the heat waves that we've had. With climate change and everything happening, you think we'll still be drinking wine in 500 years?
If humankind has taught me anything, it's that we find a way to adapt, for better or worse. And it's really interesting to watch how things are unfolding in Europe, because these are people who have been doing it for centuries and have established traditions and historical knowledge that to the point where they can make laws about the way to make wine because they know it's the best way for the region. Mm-hmm. But now they're having to question that. And in the Rhone, where they haven't been able to irrigate, it's always been dry farmed. As the drought sets in and as climate change sets in, can we please water?
But they will adapt.
Correct. And in Burgundy, as climate change, the spring frosts have gotten much worse and much more rampant, and they can't impart the use of wind machines because of tradition. And it's so interesting. They are the ones who have the historical knowledge. I think here we have the freedom to really adapt and change, but those places where it's been tried and true, and they don't want the style of the wine to necessarily change drastically, but they need to adapt.
Well, if unfortunately we're no longer making wine and you were going off to a deserted island or off to space or something like that and could only take 3 wines with you, which 3 wines would you want to take?
One of them would definitely be from Beaucastel in CDP. Their wines consistently impress. Another would be the Nenow Family Mourvèdre that we do. We do a single varietal Mourvèdre that is just funky and earthy and super peppery. I just love the uniqueness of it. So it would remind me of something really unique. And then from a white standpoint, I would probably do a rosé from Bandol, like a Tempier. Just classically good rosé.
I love that. Well, we've come to the part where we play our little game with wine and music. And so based on your wines, I want you to tell me what kind of music they make you think of, what you'd want to listen to or enjoy while sipping. So we'll start with your rosé of Grenache, which was just utterly delicious.
I think that's like a Chopin, like some sort of classical, because we intentionally picked it early. It's a lower alcohol wine with screaming acidity. We work with an awesome farmer named John Rolfe, who, although the grapes are farmed for rosé, he is meticulous about what grapes are on the vine. He doesn't just load the vine with Grenache for the sake of it. He picks the best ones, and out of that we get a really natural zingy acidity to it, and it just has this refinement to it that it screams to me classical music.
I like that. And what about the Mourvèdre that you mentioned that you would take to your deserted island?
That's a Jimi Hendrix, baby. That is left-handed, loud guitar solo, just funky and just a rock star.
Ooh. And your 11s, which is sort of the all of the showcase of the winery.
Well, I'm trying to think of a wine or a band that is very worldly. I want to say U2, but I can't stand U2. Let's say Bon Jovi.
Bon Jovi, okay. And last but not least, you spoke about your white wine that is sort of the bringing together the two worlds of Condrieu and Alsatian love, the dry.
Have you ever heard of Muzak?
Yes.
It reminds me of Muzak.
And that wine is, what are the varieties in it?
It's just Viognier.
Oh.
Yeah, so as I said, we use Viognier, which is very northern Rhone country, but we specifically work with vineyards and sites that have racy acidity. So these are usually northern or northeast facing slopes of Viognier that they don't get as much sun exposure as other spots, so it retains a lot more acidity within the grapes and is in a very heavily calcareous or limestone rich soil that allows for more acidity in the grapes.
Well, you had me at racy acidity because I love that in wine. So I'm curious if other people are as intrigued about your wines as I am. How can they come and visit you? Where can they find you?
You can find us on the great old internet, NenowFamilyWines.com. Our tasting room, as mentioned, is on Peachy Canyon Road. When you're out here, you feel like you're out in it, like you're in the middle of nowhere, in the hills of West Paso. But you're really only 10 minutes from downtown Paso. It really teleports you out and into wine country. It's at 3860 Peachy Canyon Road. It's a quaint little tasting room, as I mentioned, used to be operated by the Nenow family. They operated this as their tasting room for 20-ish years. And we found a really great partner in them, and they let us take over the space. And yeah, it's just such a great atmosphere.
And appointment only, or just show up?
Appointment only. It's quite a drive out here, so I wouldn't. I wouldn't come out without making an appointment.
But there's a lovely patio to sit out, and the breeze that comes in, even on a hot, sunny day, there's a wind that blows through. So it's really nice, and you are surrounded by trees and vineyards, and I highly recommend that. So while people should be planning their trips to Paso Robles and to visit Nenow Family Wines, I'm wondering what wine region in the world is at the top of your list to go visit? So many.
I know. Probably Barolo and Barbaresco, just wanting to experience that region. And those are some of the most unique wines in the world, and thusly some of the most expensive wines in the world. But to experience Nebbiolo in a place where I've tried Nebbiolo in lots of other places, and it's never like Barolo or Barbaresco, and it'd be so cool to visit I love northern Italy too. I've driven through it, and it'd be cool to spend some time there.
Well, you should start planning your trip. And again, to our listeners, plan your trip to Paso. Do not miss Nenow Family Wines. You got to rush because the rosé of Grenache will probably be sold out and you'll have to be waiting for the next vintage. But beautiful wines. And Drew, thank you so much for joining us today on Wine Soundtrack.
Thank you, Allison. This was a lot of fun.
I'll say cheers.
Cheers. That was great. I love those questions.